Thank you, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, for your initial and also very insightful statement on the shape and color of US foreign policy that will not change as you suggested. So thank you all for presenting your respective views on our topic today. So far, we have heard three perspectives from three different backgrounds from our panelists on some issues comparable, yet on others a bit different. Now, we can include our audience with their questions as well. I open our discussion for now for another 40 minutes. And our first question comes from a reporter from Malaysia now. So the question goes as follows, and I would ask each of our panelists to maybe give their response on this question. So the question is as follows. Has the rise of Trump in the US in 2016 encouraged the right wings in other parts of the world, including Europe? And if I may add an opposite proposition as well, has the rise of nationalism and populism before 2016 encouraged Trump to act the way he acted? So maybe we can start with Ambassador Khosroo from Iran to address this question.
Thank you. Yes, I think Trump has been influential in supporting those nationalism in Europe and other places. And as I mentioned, inside US also, it has been in a way that was unprecedented. Then, and if we remember Mr. Bannon, that now I think is in prison because of doing some wrongful action regarding the money that he collected from those people who wanted to have a wall between Mexico and the US. And he traveled to Europe and he encouraged those nationalists, ultra-nationalists, to be more active. Yes, this is harmful, and I think this will continue inside the US and inside Europe. And this is a challenge that we are facing. And I think this is from one side, through this unilateralism, people around the world will be more unhappy. From other side, this nationalism would have negative impact on friendship or the rule of law or on other issues. Then, yes, I think both Trump understood that nationalism has the capacity to build on, and then he capitalized on that and he became president on that. And my worry is that he received 11 million votes with these slogans, with these attitudes, and those who voted for him this time knew what a person he is, and this is very, very dangerous. And in Europe, many that are not in favor of nationalism were so worried if President Trump would be re-elected. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, right wings have been around for a long time. It's a matter of it's being given the light of day, so to speak, and to what extent that their thinking have been used for the pursuit of, in this case, more of a personal power base of Trump. Yeah. So in other countries, yes, this have occurred as well. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that with nationalism, it brings out protectionism. And when that occurs, the insular looking of a country is actually maybe undermining better cooperation or better well-being of different nations. So yeah, I think to a lot of extent, the right wings that have been encouraged by Trump in the US, definitely. So I do echo what Ambassador said just now. It's a matter of knowing the groups that do exist even within your own society. So that is something that we really need to watch out, because it is very dangerous indeed.
Well, I'll try to be brief. My sentiments will be quite similar to my colleagues, but let me say this very quickly. If you look at the content and the thrust of the so-called right-wing nationalism that had emerged in Europe post-Trump, we cannot deny that quite a bit of that content, that sentiment, had existed before Trump. So don't attribute it entirely to Trump. For instance, the negative sentiment towards immigrants, which played a very big role in what had happened in the last couple of years. It has been there. All it needed was a situation to bring it to the fore. And if you want to trace its roots, one can argue that the way in which Europe has felt about the other, those are not of your own kind. It's a long history. What was the European attitude towards the Jews all about? It was this negativity towards the other. In the last few decades, it has been Muslims. But at one time, it was the Jew. So that attitude towards the other has been so much a part of the European psyche. And in different situations, it emerges in different forms, slight variations, and so on. So let's keep that in mind. At the same time, states within the existing global system and within the existing political order wanting to protect their own interests, I would see that as right-wing, as narrow, as bigoted. You may have very good reasons to want to protect your own interests. Protect your economy so that it is not overrun by the powerful, the multinationals, by some of the other conglomerates which are dominating the global system. If you look at what's happening in so many different areas, you know how powerful these interests are. So you want to protect your own interests, I think it's legitimate. The question is, what interests are being protected? Is the interest of the poor and the marginalized that we're protecting? If we are doing that, then I think it is something that is praiseworthy. So we'll have to look at these issues in greater depth within their context. Thank you.
One more question from a journalist from Malaysia. So it goes like this: how will Trump's fall and Biden's win impact Malaysia, ASEAN? Maybe what specific changes, updates it can bring to TPP, for example. And again, I would like to add, to include the ambassador from Iran as well, the same question for Iran. For example, what would be the first step with regards to GCPOA with the Biden administration? Of course, Iran has reason not to trust the US administration based on experience in the past 2 years. But again, something has to be done in this regard. So what would be the first step between Iran and 5+1 countries, including the US, with regards to the future of GCPOA? So this question is for Iranian ambassador and the Malaysia, ASEAN, and the TPP for 2 other panelists from Malaysia. So maybe we can again start with the Iranian ambassador, please.
Thank you. It was US that unilaterally walked away from JCPOA. Then now US is a member of the Security Council, and Security Council has the resolution 2231. Based on that resolution, everybody is obliged to act based on that. And US should return and start acting based on its international obligations. When US is doing that, Iran will take measures to rectify whatever it has done regarding the JCPOA, because we reduce some of our obligations because in order to stop US from putting pressure then if US returns to full compliance, Iran also eventually will return to full compliance to JCPOA. Then, because it was US that walked away, first US should take a step forward and come in and observe its obligation and do cooperation with other members of the deal. And this is we are, I think, as far as I understand the position of Biden, he has promised to return to JCPOA with no condition and and not adding some other elements to that. Yes, when they were negotiating, they wanted to have more, to impose more limitation on Iran's program, peaceful program. They wanted to include some elements other than nuclear one. They wanted to have a comprehensive, including the region whatsoever. But at the end of the day, they thought that it is practical to focus on nuclear issue. And then we had that agreement. And finally, yes, Iran never trust America, and America showed in a clear manner that it is not trustworthy. But it was a win-win solution for all parties. And then America also had its own interest in that. And with this, US also know now that this administration that I mentioned may use or misuse sometimes the diplomacy or negotiation. And then we are based on JCPOA, we are ready to do full compliance after US have done so.
Thank you, Ambassador. So, Professor Rashila, can you tell us your views on new US foreign policy, Malaysia, ASEAN, and maybe TPP to include in discussion?
I think we need another lecture for that, don't we?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, of course.
But just to make it, brief. Yeah, I think we have to go back a little bit prior to Trump's presidency, because Malaysia became a comprehensive partner under Barack Obama's pivot to Asia at that point. So which means that it is not just about economic well-being, but there were a lot of other activities that took place here. We're looking at about education, you're looking about culture, you're looking about different exchanges. So that was in place prior to Trump. And actually that was continuing through even during under Trump's presidency. And I think that will continue in the future, especially if Biden does take a more liberal internationalist approach in pursuing the foreign policy. Other areas for Malaysia would be, of course, within the security dimension. There has been a lot of training on peacekeeping forces in the country, and I think that may increase in terms of training given together with the US. So all these kind of programs, I think, will maybe take forth a bit more compared to during Trump times. With regards to economy, definitely, even though Malaysia is, we export a lot in terms of agriculture, electronics, as well as optical, medical instruments, all those things. I think that will continue in the future. But I think we need to keep an eye on to what extent the pandemic is progressing on or be managed in the future. So we're looking into all those kind of dimensions in terms of the Malaysia-US relations. Now with TPP. Now TPP was actually originally pretty much originated through the US, and it was all signed by the 12 states in 2016. Now Trump withdrew in January 2017, and right after that, the 11 members actually renegotiated and came out. In fact, I think they threw out the 52 provisions wanted by the US at that point, and came up with a comprehensive and progressive agreement for TPP to this. So it's the TPP, okay, agreement ATPP. So you have this whole name, and that was signed in December 2018. Along the way also, recently RCEP was signed. So in both these multilateral agreements, US is not included. And if they want to come back in, for example, with TPP, they would have lost the one whole year of negotiation before that. So these are the things that would have to be considered. So it depends on to what extent Biden is also listening to the domestic politics which are going on inside. But generally, it would be better for them to actually join, because that would be bringing in more benefits to all the different economies. So these are things that needs to be considered under both for Malaysia as well as with the TPP. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, what is your view on US foreign policy, new US foreign policy with regards to Malaysia, ASEAN, maybe TPP? Do you see any change here, even though you were quite pessimistic with regards to any change in US foreign policy?
Yeah. Well, the pessimism remains, but one would like to add that the US, the Biden administration, should not look at ASEAN and individual countries in ASEAN, because that's the thrust of the question, through the China syndrome, that I think is very important. In other words, don't let your relationship with China, US relationship with China, or China's relationship with ASEAN, which is based on certain premises, don't let these color your attitude towards ASEAN. Look at ASEAN as a region, but more important as individual nation states who are concerned about their sovereignty, who are protective of their independence. There'll be occasions where it may not gel with your interests, but you must take it as part of the process. As you can see from various ASEAN meetings and the positions taken vis-a-vis the South China Sea and so on. The issue of the South China Sea will remain contentious, and the US has also got to learn how to adopt a more mature approach to the South China Sea, just as we would like to see China adopt a more mature approach to the South China Sea. And individual ASEAN states and collectively ASEAN would like to see the South China Sea as an issue that will not impinge upon their own interests. This is going to be a contentious issue, but we would appeal to the US to see this issue and other related issues outside the prism of ASEAN, China, and so on. It will condition and color your attitude, we know that. But nonetheless, don't let that dominate your thinking, because then it's going to be very, very difficult. The question about TPP, well, the TPP structure that was initially articulated during Obama's presidency, there were issues that the civil society groups in the region, including Malaysia, were very unhappy about. And for that reason, we were happy to see that TPP did not materialize. And one of the most critical was the one pertaining to national sovereignty. You know, the TPP would have allowed certain business interests to dominate against the interests of individual nation states when it came to trade disputes, disputes about investment, disputes about technology, and so on. It gave a lot of powers to that type of arbitration. It was certainly not in the interest of the individual states in ASEAN or ASEAN as a collectivity. So if you're going to try to have another type of regional mechanism, but somehow you try to bring back these concerns of yours to the back door, I'm referring to the US, I don't think it's going to work.
Mm.
Recognize sovereignty, independence, deal with the countries as countries that deserve respect, that value their dignity, then I think we may get somewhere. Because if you look at RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that has emerged without the United States, I think RCEP has got tremendous potential. It has got tremendous potential. And the US, if it wants to benefit from this, it has to go along with this attempt at strengthening the economies of the region. But if they try something that they had done in the past, including what was done in the Obama era, it's not going to help. They must keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you. Now we will, I will share some questions from the audience. We have a number of them, and I would kindly request from you to be as short as possible with your answers. Following two questions are for all of you. So the first question is like this: what are the panelists' view on the Trump era impact on global economic environment before the impact of COVID-19? So before the impact of COVID-19, what was the Trump's era impact on global economic environment? Maybe we start again with the Iranian ambassador.
I'm not a specialist on economy as such, but inside the US, the economy before COVID was kind of strong, sort of strong, but Obama administration would say that this was the result of their foundation for the economy, and Trump administration only used that opportunity that they created regarding job creation and investment and advancement in stock exchange and so on and so forth. But the idea of tariff and trade war with China, I don't think that was helpful for American. It was not helpful for American economy, and it was neither for China nor for America. And in this way, U.S. was in war with globalization in a way, while China was a forerunner for globalization. China is the number one, is a partner of more than maybe 150 countries around the world. And then through this trade cooperation, China has become so powerful, while US was using its dollar as a weapon. That weaponization of dollar had negative impact in relation to global economy. This is what occurred particularly regarding the sanction on Iran, that itself was unlawful, and using of dollar as a weapon was also a very sad and unfortunate action by US.
Yes, era on a global economic environment. I think, yeah, I mean, if you take a long view of history, so to speak, the short answer would be before Trump, before the COVID era, you could actually see what is called the rise of Oriental globalization. We've had globalization all this while, yeah, the process where you have the compression of time and space, but at the same time, what is forefronting it? Historically, actually, it was the Oriental globalization where China was actually the power prior to Enlightenment, so to speak. Once industrialization came into play, that is the Occidental globalization. And in the Trump time, just prior to the COVID, now we are all seeing the rise of Oriental globalization again. So these are the things which are going on, and I think this is something that we all have to adjust in terms of living. And the main player would be player would be China, especially through OBOR, the one belt one road situation. So I think this is the thing that both US and other countries, including definitely ASEAN member states, would have to take into consideration. Yeah.
Very quickly, Emir, I think on the whole, Trump's impact upon the global economy was negative. It was negative because he strengthened sanctions. He made sanctions which were already there before him more pernicious and more destructive. If you look at the sanctions against Iran, for instance, which was from a humanitarian point of view, in terms of justice, in terms of its impact upon human suffering. It was a terrible act of inhumanity. And his sanctions against Cuba and Trump's sanctions against Venezuela, which were made much, much worse, and a number of other countries, the man increased sanctions, and most of all, the trade war against China. Not sanctions, but nonetheless an attempt to use trade against China. So if trade is an important factor, the freeing of trade is important in terms of globalization and so on, I think Trump's impact was very negative. And generally he was against globalization, but his arguments seemed to be so weak against globalization because he wanted a type of globalization which would make America great again.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that globalization, if it is to work, must have something in it for everyone, for other actors too, and then it becomes attractive to everyone. But if your central notion is make my own country great at the expense of others, then I think you've not understood the forces that are emerging in the world. You can't stop globalization. For that reason, I think it was a disaster, Trump.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar. Two following questions have been already and more specifically answered by Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, so I will address them only with two remaining panelists. So let me read these two questions. The US has a long-running trend of appropriating civil society movement, LGBT, women's rights, and so on and so forth, to destabilize other governments, regardless of how much democratic support that government has from its own people. This is all part of their regime change strategies, especially if those countries don't toe the line. So do you think this may change under Biden? And second, very similar question, do you think the US human rights approach might change under the Biden administration? So Ambassador Khosroo, can you please give more specific view on these two questions from your side? Are you optimistic or pessimistic for any change?
No, for US, human rights has always been a weapon. Like dollar, they are using it like weapon. And it is used against those countries that they are not in favor politically and or have strategic differences. Then, no, these human rights have been misused, and in many areas that they have helped those who were violating human rights. And in Iran itself, they made a coup 64 years ago, 67 years ago, toppled national government of Dr. Muzaffar. You know, these are, and they have done all these under the name of human rights, humanitarian assistance, whatsoever. Look what they did in Libya under humanitarian assistance, still war there. Then, no, unfortunately, I don't think that during maybe Trump was less interventionist in the way that wanted to make America again great again. I mean, first, and maybe that view that we should come back to our home, to our domestic issues was correct, but he couldn't use that in a positive way because he was seeing all things in the mirror of what that would have in favor of him, not the country. Anyhow, I don't think during this new administration on this issue, I don't think even they are talking more about human rights, and these human rights they are using it in a double standard way. They are using against those that they have other difficulties with countries, and they are not. They are selectively choosing the issue and selectively imposing that against countries. No, unfortunately, I don't see any human concern in that platform.
Okay. So next question is actually more specifically for Dr. Chandra Muzaffar. Let me read the question. Thank you, Dr. Chandra, for a typically clear and thoughtful presentation. The centrality of the preservation of the US dominance ensures changes in style and not in content and values. Still, it is argued that the nature of global and regional politics is such that there is an inherent need for international leadership, and the US fills that void. Is it true that there is necessarily such a void? If so, what alternative ways there are to manage the need for international leadership? So, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, this is more specifically for you. What is your take on this question?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a question of how we define leadership. When you say international leadership, does it have to be a single leader? Does it have to be a particular coterie, a certain nation state? What does one mean by international leadership? Now, if you look at the realities in the last so many decades, there has been international leadership of certain issues. For instance, it was international leadership expressed through collective action based upon a moral principle that helped to dismantle the apartheid regime in South Africa. It was leadership at the international level. Of course, a lot of other factors played their role, but there was undoubtedly international leadership. So here you have the people rising up, as it were, in a certain way, not the way in which people understand masses coming out in the open and so on, but there was a collective response against the apartheid regime in South Africa. And if you look at the UN vote on certain issues, on the question of Cuba, that is the international voice. It is international leadership. Without leadership being orchestrated by anyone, people coming together unanimously. If you look at UN General Assembly resolutions on Cuba, asking that the sanctions be lifted year in and year out. Sometimes it's so overwhelming. Only 2 countries vote against that resolution, United States and Israel. Everyone else wants this unjust imposition of power against the Cuban people, a small country of 11 million people. They want justice for the Cuban people. And one could argue that on the issue of, and you would know this, Emir, your own country, Bosnia-Herzegovina, if you look at the UN General Assembly resolution, there was quite a lot of support for the rights of the Bosnian people. So I think people are capable, nation states are capable of doing what is right. And I would like to go a little further because it's such an important issue. Look at Palestine. The General Assembly has supported Palestine a few times now. Its non-member status is a result of how countries feel about Palestine. Now, if that's the sort of leadership we're talking about, yes, it's there. Let's recognize it and strengthen it. Give it meaning. Now, how would you do it in the case of Palestine? If you find that so many countries want some sort of justice for the Palestinian people, let's work together for that justice. Why aren't we doing that? Why? Because there are vested interests that are against justice for the Palestinians. And it's these vested interests that are preventing the emergence of genuine global leadership. It is these vested interests. It's not because of the UN Charter per se or because of other factors. It's largely vested interests that are preventing these genuine interests from emerging. And I would say that if you go down the line, whether it is a question of nuclear weapons or issues pertaining to global trade, any number of issues, you will find that most people have a fairly balanced and equitable approach. We should recognize that, and that would become the basis of a new leadership for the world as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Following a few questions, more or less, we have already addressed related to human rights and right-wing politics. So let me address the next question to all of you. Let me read this. During the campaign, Biden openly warned autocrats. Moreover, the 5th pillar of Biden's foreign policy is the toughness on undemocratic regimes and dictators, as it said here. So mentioning Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Brazilian, Philippines, and so on and so forth. So what is your insight on this particular area of international relations and Biden's foreign policy? Please, Ambassador Gholam Ali Khosroo, on this issue. Start with you.
Yeah, we should differentiate between words and deed when they are campaigning. And during the campaign, many issues may raise. But when it wanted to become a policy and being carried out, then the differences would start. As you know, many of these countries have lobby inside Washington, and they have connection with Congress, and they have connection with administrations. And this is I don't believe that America would act against dictators. You know, America has supported dictators in the past, and even, as I mentioned, toppled a democratic leadership in Iran, and then imposed a regime that was toppled later after 25 years with a great revolution. You know, this was happened by US, and it doesn't matter whether they are Democrat or they are Republican. And then even this Trump was sending us messages that if you come and talk with me, we will solve it, and I will give you more than Obama, and we will solve it in 2 minutes, you know, in 1 hour. And so even now he's repeating that if I being re-elected, I would solve this problem with Iran in 1 day, you know. These things are childish and a kind of reckless approach. No, I don't think. No country in the world trusts American support of people. You know, they are using that for other purpose. They have hidden agenda for everybody, and then they are talking like this. They are talking like this. They are acting in another way. But I'm sure that they have been a growing dissatisfaction with the war in Yemen, and maybe America would stop sending weaponry to Saudis that is fighting in Yemen, and maybe that Yemen situation come to end through a kind of negotiation and diplomacy.
Okay, yeah, I'll be short. On this issue, if you look back into Biden's foreign policy speech, I think you can just pick up maybe the last theme on it, which is to renew American leadership to mobilize global actions. During campaign, things can be said. However, it is important to see now what kind of American leadership that is going to be provided. Probably the leadership style will change, but the tenets of it, in terms of dealing with different countries, different regions, we need to see what kind of a policy statement that will be coming out of that. So chances are, things will not change too much. So, which means that, you know, if human rights are the thing that they're going to push on, then it is then the question is, whose national interests are we looking at? And it is usually the interest of that particular country. In this case, it would be the national interest of the US. Yeah.
Very quickly, I think what the US should do, Emir, is not mobilize forces to target anti-democratic nation states and so on. It just serves your own bigoted interests, as we've seen all along. People know that. What we would like to see the US leadership do is something that's not done at all so far. We would like the US leadership in its domestic policies, but more so in its foreign policies, to be more introspective. Search your own soul. Look at yourself, what you have done. If as a result of your foreign policies over the last 7 decades, so many thousands of people have died, if as a result of that you have rampaged nation states, if this is what you have done as a result of a foreign policy, and it is well documented, it is there in black and white, you can see it. You can see it in the lives and sufferings of human beings. If you can do a bit of introspection, search your own soul, and you say, look, we should not be doing this, then I think there may be a change. This is the advice that Cornel West, an American academic, had given the contestants for the presidency some months ago. What we need is introspection, looking at oneself, rather than trying to mobilize forces and promote democracy and all that, when actually, you know, it is a farce. It is a joke.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a few more questions, but more or less they are repeating issues related to TPP, human rights, and so on and so forth. So I will address myself the last,
Okay.
and I think also very critical question to all of you. And this is related to the most important bilateral relations, or if you like, the bilateral relations of the century, which is between the US and China. And my question goes as follows: can rise of China happen peacefully? This is an important question that many are asking today, considering the very challenging dynamics between rising power from one side and ruling power from the other side. If you look at the history, and there was a study by Professor Allison from Harvard University who analyzed 16 cases in last 500 years, out of which 13 cases when rising power took over from the ruling power ended up in a war. What can happen with these 17 cases in human history? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic it can happen peacefully, or you are not hopeful? Can you please all address this critical question? Maybe we can start again with the Ambassador Khosroo, please.
Thank you. On this, yes, there are other thinkers like Mearsheimer. He is of the view that eventually and inevitably China and America would have military conflict because the rise of China is like the rise of America, and when America was on rise, then he did whatever he thought it is needed for their rise, and then again China would do the same, and in this way the interests of both countries would be in clear conflict. While Mr. Graham Allison and maybe Kissinger and others are of the view that yes, there is situation that may lead to conflict, military conflict, but there are ways that we can avoid that, and they are trying to find ways that they can avoid. But it is clear that for America, it is unacceptable to be the second. America in the last 100 or so years have been the first number one in the world, and then for it is unbelievable, unacceptable. Anybody, China or others, or a group of countries be the first, the number one, and this is what they are arrogance, and this arrogance may lead to conflict. They should understand that history have shown that China have been number one in the world for more than two millennia, and then China can return to what it was if China is not aggressive, if China do not want to export its way of living to others, and if it wanted to do this, as Dr. Chandra said, through trade, through cooperation, through infrastructure, through Belt and Road, then not through war and conflict, then why America should be so unhappy and so furious and looking after conflict? This is what I can say.
Okay, I think maybe we should flip it and look in terms of peace instead of conflict. Okay, the reason why I say this is this. As I mentioned earlier, it is about the rise again of Oriental globalization. And in doing that, historically, China has actually never been really conflicting historically. So while there may be a rise of China, it doesn't mean there is a decline of US. So sometimes just because one is rising, you think something is going down, but US is still as it is. It has the might of its military, it's got the economic well-being, it's got the population, and so on. So to me, it is a matter of adjusting to the new environment. It is not so much conflicting, but I think the thing is to look more towards the people-to-people connection. Because sometimes when you talk about state to state and you take a more of a realist perspective, then you're talking about conflict and war all the time. But if we change that and look into more of a internationalist perspective, then I think the relationship would be different. The view would be more towards peace instead of viewing it from a more conflictual environment. Yeah.
Let us look at the empirical evidence, Emir. So far, if you look at the rise of China, China has already risen. It has been peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
It has been peaceful. In fact, you compare China's rise to the rise of every other power in the last 200 or 300 years. China's rise has been relatively very, very peaceful. Compared to even little countries in Europe like Spain and Portugal, it is accompanied by bloodshed, massive killings when those powers were coming up in the 16th century. But in the case of China, if you look at what it has accomplished so far, its rise in different spheres, it has been peaceful. And that is part of China's history, that it had emerged as a power right up to the 18th century. I mean, of course, there were periods when there was a different pattern, but 18th century, China was economically the most important country on earth. 23% of the global GDP was in the hands of China. And of course, it declined because of the rise of the West and all the rest of it. We know that, colonialism. But nonetheless, if you look at its past and how it has been in the last few decades, it has been very peaceful. And even if you look at contemporary disputes, many people are not even aware that the sort of current disputes China has had with its neighbors, out of a total of 17 major disputes, at the time when China first began to emerge under Deng Xiaoping's reforms and so on, 15 out of those 17 disputes, the Chinese have succeeded in resolving them without war, without conflict as such. So I think generally the Chinese have approached their relations with others in a different way, and we have to acknowledge that, based upon what is factually true. To me, the real problem is not China. Why do we keep on asking about, how China's rise been so? I think the problem is, as Brother Ali Khosroo pointed out, it is the force, the power that is dominant. That is the problem. The dominant force that we're talking about is the US. The US will not accept any other role. It sees itself as the top dog. It dominates the world. It feels that is its right. That's its conception of what it is. Well, let's look at the US presidential elections. Was there any similarity between the two men, Trump and Biden? The similarity was the notion of the greatness of the United States. Trump, let's make US great again, and his track record, as far as the people are concerned, is he had made America great again. The notion of greatness. In the case of Biden, what was his notion of the United States of America? That we will once again lead the world. There's no difference from a certain perspective. We will lead the world because somehow it is our right. We are the only ones who can lead the world. And I think the problem in Emir is, in the ultimate analysis, all of us. We have to free ourselves from that psychology. Somehow it has to be the US. It has to be US power. There's nothing else that is possible. I think we have to free ourselves from that. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe in what has happened historically. We have to believe in the examples of numerous other countries right through human history and tell ourselves, yes, we have faith in ourselves. And we will do things which are good for the whole of humankind. And that will be our ultimate judgment from the people. We will do these things that are good for people. There's so many things that have yet to be done. We are not going to dominate people. That's not the only way. We're not going to control them, steal their resources, kill their people. Why should this be the way of history? I think it's so important for us to free ourselves from that thinking, that we will not pay obeisance to those who are powerful because of the ability to destroy others, which is how we have seen the strong and the powerful so far. We have to change that. Once we change our mentality, then I think the world will change. Because, one of the great Southeast Asian revolutionaries, thinkers, was Jose Rizal. And Rizal, from the Philippines, he once said that the tyrant is possible only because we are prepared to be slaves. This is why we have to get rid of that mentality of being so slavish in accepting what we feel is the West, the US, their power. We have to free ourselves from that. Once we've liberated our minds, we would have liberated the whole of humankind. Thank you.
Thank you again. So on this note, on this positive note that the dynamics between rising China and ruling US can end up peacefully, we can end our webinar. I really enjoyed our discussion. I hope the audience enjoyed the discussion as well. This is an important topic, very important topic today. There might be, as you all know, there might be different assumptions in different geopolitical areas. There might be also different assumptions in different foreign policy pillars of the US. So this debate will go on. I'm also very much happy that we did not touch only the human agency, the personality, the leadership, but we also very much discussed systemic, geopolitical, and structural forces. So on this note, I thank Ambassador Ali Khosroo, I thank Professor Dato Dr. Rashila Ramli, and I thank Dr. Chandra Muzaffar for their insightful statements and their answers to all these questions. And well, hope to see you again soon. All the best from Sarajevo and Bosnia.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.